Hello and welcome everyone, particularly those who are new to Achates Inspires. My name is Lucy and I'm Associate Director of Strategy at Achates. To give you a visual description of myself, I'm a white woman in her 30s with long strawberry blonde hair and a fringe. Today I'm wearing a black and white striped dress. I'd also like to give a very warm welcome to Alastair and Caroline, who I'll be introducing properly shortly. But Caroline, would you like to say hello and introduce yourself?
Thanks, Lucy. Hello, everyone. I'm Caroline. I'm the director of Achates, and I'm a middle-aged white woman with short, wavy hair, and I'm wearing a blue shirt and have chunky gold earrings and a big gold necklace too. Thanks, Lucy.
And Alastair.
Hello, I'm Alastair Levy. I'm delighted to be here, and I have grey curly hair and glasses. I'm a middle-aged man wearing a pink shirt and with quite a lot of books behind me.
Lovely. Thank you so much, both. So this Achates Inspires is online to connect with more people and pre-recorded to enable us to fully transcribe the session. However, there will be Achates colleagues on hand to answer any questions via the chat function when this is broadcast on the 16th of May. So to give you some background, over 10 years, Achates has provided provocation and inspiration to organisations and senior individuals across the cultural sector, offering expert and inclusive thinking across strategy, recruitment and fundraising. Since 2019, Achates Live has provided practical help and support with monthly sessions for fundraisers in the cultural sector. And now, as the sector continues to emerge from the COVID-19 pandemic and faces new challenges and opportunities, there has never been a greater need for the ability to come together and find solutions, which is why we have launched Achates Inspires this year. Achates Inspires provides a cross-arts forum for chief executives, executive directors, and senior leaders to learn together, hearing from expert voices and providing a peer learning network to pool expertise across the sector. In doing so, we will build on the art form networks that existed before or as a result of the recent pandemic to provide leaders with support from their peers, but moving to a cross-art form cultural sector-wide platform. So after 3 very successful in-person sessions earlier this year, we have moved Achates Inspires online to ensure as many leaders as possible can engage with this network in an accessible format. We will continue to host quarterly in-person meetings with more details on those to be announced soon. Today, we are really delighted to be exploring embracing risk with a particular focus on this in relation to generating commercial income. So I'd like to introduce our esteemed guests. Alastair is an independent advisor and executive coach who helps global organizations across the private, public and social sectors innovate and grow and navigate the risks of an increasingly complex and volatile external environment. Alastair started his career in the arts as an orchestral and operatic conductor and general manager of a professional chamber orchestra and opera group. He then worked on social security, welfare and pensions in the UK civil service before spending 22 years until the end of last year at leading global management consultancy, McKinsey and Company. There, he advised on government reform in over 30 countries. Then as global director of risk, he advised the firm, its board and 3,500 partners globally on how to manage risks faced by the firm. He has maintained his interest in music and arts throughout his career, advising a range of arts organisations, and was the founder chair of Apollo Music Projects, a non-profit which takes chamber music into schools in East London. Most recently, he has applied his experience across sectors to develop thinking on how leaders of arts organisations can best manage risk in an era of increasing volatility. So welcome, Alastair. And Caroline is founder and director of Achates, leading on major campaigns, organisational strategy, and is our international fundraising expert. In 2005, having completed the £70 million capital campaign to create the Darwin Centre at the Natural History Museum, Caroline became the first director of PEN International, heading up 145 centres in 105 countries and acting as the literature representative at UNESCO. Since founding Achates, the company has advised over 500 organisations of all scales, from individual artists and activists to major national charities. Caroline has extensive experience of leading and advising on capital projects, is chair of the Cultural Philanthropy Foundation, and in 2015 founded the National Campaign for Support for the Arts, the Achates Philanthropy Prize. In 2023, she was included in the Stage's 100 list of most influential people in theatre as a co-founder of the London Ticket Bank. She is a trustee of the National Centre for Writing. So thank you both for joining.
Thanks,
now,
Lisa.
Risk. Cultural organisations have traditionally been risk averse, with risk registers dominating board meetings, and especially at a post-pandemic time, leaders increasingly focused on immediate financial security. So, when the limits of voluntary income generation are becoming clear and the pressure for guaranteed financially successful programs increases, do we need to recalibrate our attitude to risk? As we are working in the cultural sector, I was drawn to the idea of what risk-taking means for us and wanted to share a quote from artist and teacher Fiona Godfrey. To be an artist is to be a risk-taker, experimenting with possible failure, ugliness, and the feeling of paint wasted, for the potential discovery of something completely new, amazing, unique, and original. Risk is often only championed when it comes to the work or art created, which at a time of severe economic pressure is also currently under threat. Unless we embrace risk, allow for experimentation and the capacity for failure, can we truly advance and create a bold and bright future for the cultural sector? If not, how do we embrace risk across the whole of our organisations, not just in the work, especially when it comes to commercial income generation and engaging audiences? So, Caroline, I'm going to come to you first, if you don't mind, to share your thoughts about risk from an Achates perspective. Over to you, Caroline.
Thanks so much, Lucy, and thanks for that really wonderful quote, which I think sets the scene and the challenge so well. In December 22, a Rubicon that I've been anticipating for more than 6 years was finally passed. It became clear that the combination of state support and contributed, or as we may think of it, fundraised income in the system was no longer enough, and that cultural organisations who were lucky enough to have state support effectively had 3 years to build a new commercial income stream in addition to tickets, and should they have it, hospitality, if they are to continue to thrive. It's a moment I've spent years telling cultural organisations to prepare for. How long do you think we've got? Countless leaders have asked me in the hope of staving off the inevitable a little longer, because of course no creative ever went into a subsidised cultural sector because they wanted to make money or to run a business that wasn't an arts organisation. And it is for that reason that we at Achates have long resisted setting up a division that would support the development of new commercial activity. But also because I knew that the challenge was that whilst I have always been comfortable with contributed income, because for me, philanthropy is part of a life well lived, and because fundraising has been central to encouraging cultural organisations taking the audience-informed approach we have long advocated for, commercial income should, for a cultural organisation, in my view, always further its purpose. So at Achates over the last year, we've helped around 100 cultural organisations to better define their purpose. And in doing so, it has become clear that in many instances, the understanding of the executive and the board, the non-executive, of what the organisation is trying to do for whom, and the change they are seeking to bring about, is rarely unified. So asking them to double down on that purpose and to come up with a commercial initiative in line with it often seems a hard ask. However, it has become clear that whilst Achates may retain an over 70% success rate for its grant writing clients through our work with them on audiences, purpose and theory of change, at a time when overall trust and foundation success rates have plummeted to less than 5%, well, it became clear that this was a luxury that we must now forego. We delivered more than 45 pro bono workshops in the days after the Arts Council England National Portfolio Organisation decisions landed. And I started every one of the ones I led by saying, if you're lucky enough to have support, you now have 3 years to build new earned income streams. and to those who are not so fortunate, that they were unlikely to simply be able to fundraise their way out of the scenario, and that our strategy division would have to quickly mobilise to offer new support in this area, devising products that further purpose and support organisations in thinking about possible finance and risk. What I've realised is that, as Lucy's pointed out, ironically, the cultural sector, which is fundamentally about creative risk-taking, has become extremely risk adverse as the economic climate has got more challenging over the last 10 years. And of course, challenging economics also means less resources and less space to develop ideas, and the idea of a risk has become increasingly a luxury that we felt we cannot afford. I think we're also extremely proud as a sector. I think we're determined not to let our organisation fail, no matter what the price. And it is fundamentally a change in this attitude to commercial risk and failure that I really want to invite cultural organisations to consider today. If we don't take risk in the current climate, with no funding formula for the distribution of state support, you can read my LinkedIn piece on that topic, just went up this week, and with 89% of the voluntary income going to the 50 biggest brands, as the Arts Council England refers to them, failure is already a huge risk. Setting up a commercial arm with independent financing that you can simply close if it fails is a much smaller risk, and one that I would advocate every cultural organisation now needs to think about taking. However, what we would always advocate is that charitable or not-for-profit organisations should not only think about the bottom line, our challenge is much more complex and interesting than that. At Achates, we advocate for the executive and non-executive to reach an understanding on the balance of the art or the work, the audiences and the money, the triple bottom line which supports them in optimising their impact and purpose. Earned income that furthers that purpose can be just another way of bringing that about. And I'd like to close with two very brief examples of the sector where I think that this has been done really well. Lucy's mentioned that I'm a trustee of the National Centre for Writing in Norwich, where the long-standing director, Chris Gribble, who very sadly will be leaving us later this year after a remarkable 17 years at the helm, has developed a programme of writing courses with UEA, which brings the organisation an important earned income source, whilst opening up who engages with its work, with both paid and subsidised places, challenging audiences to get actively engaged and be creative, and linking them to the wider programme and offer. Equally, over the last couple of years, and particularly through the pandemic, Soho Theatre has established a comedy channel of work, which it's now looking to scale and commercialise through investment. To my mind, these are two great examples of what can be achieved by taking a risk whilst also furthering your purpose. Thanks, Lucy.
Thank you so much, Caroline. That's really thought-provoking. So, Alastair, could you start by introducing yourself, your extensive experience of risk and your approach to it?
Thank you, Lucy, and also thank you, Caroline. And I fully agree. And I think this question you framed of how do you combine an artistic mission with a mission of sustaining your organisation, as part of which there's a commercial mission, I think is incredibly important, and it's complicated. By way of background, I've had a phenomenal privilege across my career to have worked in the arts and wider non-profit sector, to have worked in the public sector, to worked in the private sector, and also to have advised all three sectors during my time at McKinsey, and advised on risk in all those sectors. Maybe just a couple of general thoughts coming from that. Firstly, I think in terms of the risks organizations face and the way they address them, I think the similarities of issues and the similarities of approach are much greater across public, private, social sectors than they're different. And that would be the first thing. A second would be on the specific, this question of commercial enterprise. I think in the arts, for someone experiences in the arts, that there's this dichotomy, right? There's the good side of the artistic mission, and there's the slightly dark side of money earning. And I know many people are a million miles away from that. All I would say is that's not only something about the art sector. You look at the NHS and you get medical professionals and managers. You look at the media and you have people who are independent journalists and people who are part of the commercial organization. You look at law firms, you look at many sectors, there's this question of organizations of different parts. I think organizations which take a holistic approach to what they need to do and what they need to do in a more complex and volatile world are going to be ones which are better set up for success and actually have more interesting, fulfilling conversations, holistic conversations for the people who work with them. And then the third one is about thinking on risk. I come with a very simple approach, which is to see risk as an enabler. Risk as an enabler of impact, of innovation, of success, of entrepreneurship. Not a question of a bureaucratic process, not a question of something to tack on at the end or boxes to tick, but it's inherently part of a process of saying, how can we do what we aspire to do as an organization and do it in a successful and sustainable way?
Thank you so much, Alastair. Yeah, it's so interesting, isn't it? That kind of feeling of risk as being this terrifying thing, and actually viewed as a kind of negative, rather than, like you were saying, an enabler of organisations, and something that, as the topic of this says, should be embraced and across the organisation, and really building that culture. We talk a lot at Achates about having a fundraising culture across the organisation, in the way that the work and the culture of that exists across the organisation, and how important it is to ensure that that everyone is on board and singing from the same hymn sheet, as you would say, in order to kind of drive purpose and further the organisation's ambitions. So thank you for that. Caroline, did you have anything to add?
No, I just really want to reflect and say it's so interesting to hear Alastair with his unique experience of both the cultural sector, the commercial sector, but actually broader than that, as you rightly point out, governmental sectors, etc. And I think, Alastair, you express it so eloquently and simply in terms of that holistic approach and how important that is. And I think that's so inspiring to so many people in the cultural sector to hear, because I think we tend to think of ourselves as an other. We tend to think of ourselves as fundamentally different to everybody else, and I think there's a great deal of reassurance to take from that. So thank you, it's really, really helpful.
So I've got another question for you, Alastair, if that's okay, which is what are your thoughts on why risk is top of mind for leaders in the cultural sector and beyond the cultural sector as well?
Now, listen, thank you on that. I do think there's been a change, and many companies, I'm not alone in thinking that. And I think if you look 10 years back, for many but not all organizations, risk was somehow a technical activity. If you were building a new building in whichever sector it was, there was operational and financial risk in delivering that program. If you were an oil company drilling a well, you looked at the safety of that well. If you're a bank, you looked at your assets and regulatory compliance, but it was a somehow technical activity. I think that's really changed, and it's fundamentally changed for a number of reasons, and a number of drivers of volatility in the external world in which we all operate, whichever sector we're in. And there are kind of five, I'd say, principal drivers of that. The first is around geopolitical and political volatility, which one sees in increasing tension between US and China, in Ukraine, in Brexit, and polarized economies and debates. The second is around economic volatility, seen as in rising inflation, rising interest rates, rising debt, challenged fiscal situations for governments and their impact on sectors, not least the arts. The third is climate, and it's very real and present impact, both on climate itself and on its sisters in nature and biodiversity. Social volatility, as demography changes, chasms of inequality continue and in cases deepen, and the need for kind of fundamental change on diversity and inclusion become ever more important. And technological volatility, the sheer pace of change, both in terms of customer and audience expectations, in terms of the potential for innovation, and alongside that, cyber risk. So that external context creates not least a fascinating time to lead any organization, whether from an artistic leadership side or a managerial leadership side, or both. And in the arts, it is very direct impact, which colleagues joining this will be very familiar with, right? Whether that's about donor and sponsor scrutiny, whether it's about Me Too and ensuring zero tolerance on harassment, whether it's on diversity and some of the long-term issues on that, whether the financial issues, Caroline, obviously you cited so clearly, on cyber risk and the whole gamut of issues, which are in a way the overhang of the pandemic. So I think there has been a real change. We will continue, I think, for the decades ahead to be in an unsettled time. And that will play into what it means to lead an organization, what it means to lead artistic endeavor, and what it means to create sustainable organizations for the future.
Thank you. And so what would you say that context means for cultural organizations today?
I think it means a range of things. And by the way, from the conversations I've been lucky to have with leaders across a range of arts organizations, there are huge numbers of outstanding things which are clearly happening. There's risk which has been embedded through governance, through boards, through risk committees, that people in operational roles who've always taken risk extremely seriously. And there's your wonderful quote at the beginning cited, right? Risk is at the heart of artistic endeavor, right? Whether that's about performance or programming or capital investments that enable that. So it's not that risk is new, and not that thoughtful leadership is new to organizations. I think looking across sectors and looking at how this plays in the arts, I think there are a number of practices which can be particularly helpful to think through. I think the first is to ensure that periodically you're creating an updated view of what are the top priority risks we face, what are the most important things we need to think about, and what are the clear owned actions against them, whether those are evergreen risks we've always thought about or new and emerging risks, whether they're risks of the scale we thought they would be, or as Caroline, again, you mentioned on financial funding, right? Suddenly those risks, what if that risk of losing funding was 10 times as great, right? 100% of revenue, not funded revenue, not 10%. And whether those risks are nearer term or longer term. So firstly, just periodically, just check you're really thinking about the right things and the things you really should be caring about. The second practice, I think, is talking about risk. As I mentioned earlier, it's not an add-on, and it's certainly not a document called a register, although those can obviously have a role to play. But I think as part of day-to-day conversations in planning and delivery and thinking about strategy, organization, operations, that just risk becomes part of the problem solving throughout all people in the organization. The third I would say is about the voices you listen to, and listening to multiple voices, to diverse voices, discordant voices inside and outside the organization, to check you're listening and hearing to different things that evolve. The fourth, which is very natural core in the arts, is around courage and taking bold decisions, which can be of two types, more than two types, but they can be bold decisions to say no to something, which multiple people in the organization care a lot about for good reason. And they can be bold decisions, and you referred to this earlier, to say yes, but to take on a new risk, to go into a new venture, a new geography, a new way of engaging audiences. And then the fifth thing I think which wraps around this is to think about your risk model, your approach to risk, and to be able to have a very clear narrative that you can share, not least with your board, with your funders, with your donors and other stakeholders, about this is how we as an organization think about risk, and to be able to articulate that as a way to build confidence in the stewardship and the governance of the organization.
Thank you so much, Alastair. That's, I mean, that approach to risk and how it can be actually framed differently in each organization, and how you navigate that, I suppose, throughout the organization and with stakeholders and trustees. So I wondered if, Caroline, if you'd mind just kind of sharing some thoughts, I suppose, on how you think people can navigate those conversations, or advice that you might give on navigating risk with directors, trustees, and wider stakeholders that might be involved.
It's great to hear Alastair talking that through. He makes it not only sound very clear and simple, he also makes it sound exciting, which is quite remarkable. It's really great. I think that one of the things that it really made me think about as Alastair was speaking was one of the tensions, I think, in culture is because we have a philosophical belief about the desire and the history of state funding of the arts, it sometimes closes us down to some of the things that Alastair was talking about, that being open to diverse voices, being courageous about thinking about what's next and being open to risk. And I think changing the mindset of cultural organisations from them seeing themselves as a government body to seeing government funders as one of the stakeholders, but their charitable purpose being bigger than that, them not being the simple delivery function for that cultural policy. I'm always really concerned when cultural organisations see, for example, the documents they've developed for example, Arts Council England as their business plan, and sort of saying to them, that isn't your business plan, that's just one aspect of one of your stakeholders' relationship documents. And making sure that organisations see themselves independent and beyond that, I think is a really important starting point. The partnership may be key to the business plan, but it really is only one part of it. And boards are too often focused on fulfilling those obligations in that agreement, rather than considering the kinds of things that Alastair was talking about and thinking about their purpose and therefore where their duty to their communities, who are actually their number one stakeholder, really is. And that then, by focusing in on that purpose, that holistic approach that Alastair's talked about, really empowers them then to think about that triple bottom line I've mentioned of the work, the audiences and the money.
I think it's interesting, isn't it, when we talk about kind of charitable work and the relationship of risk to charitable work, and actually when often you are, in a, not necessarily so much in a kind of in all cultural organisations, but certainly in wider charities, if you are trying to support potentially kind of vulnerable people or make changes for people who are at risk or vulnerable, then how the aversion to doing anything that might compromise that at all, especially when it comes to kind of income generation or anything else, is so much greater, I suppose. Alastair, did you have any thoughts to add on that?
I was going to say, Caroline, you mentioned a lot of boards, and I think it's just worth thinking a little bit about that in a sense. I mean, I think one thing is just the time that boards have, it's going to be inherently limited. But I think there's a tension there. I think the risks that organizations in the arts, but across all sectors are facing, are inherently complex, are inherently nuanced, multifaceted. And I think it is important to find the right time at the right occasions just to sit back and reflect on those issues. And if that needs a subgroup to go away and think about something or some extra time to be made, because some of these issues are going to deeply affect the purpose and the sustainability of the organization. So I think firstly, making time. The second, really, I think both, and this obviously affects board composition around as well as the way to engage with them. I think just the huge benefit of boards for the different areas of expertise that they bring, the different networks they bring, the different perspectives they bring, and really making sure there are ways to mine those. Because again, the issues which are affecting arts organizations are likely to have close cousins in issues being faced in other sectors and other environments. And I think there's also just something in the way to engage in those conversations, right? Engaging early, engaging openly, and engaging in the spirit of collaborative problem solving, right? So that you really get the challenge and support that you're looking to get from a board, and the board can play its role on governance.
Thank you. Yeah, and so our teams, our cultural organisations, they've got their subgroups, they've made the time, and what would you say in that time and with those people are the key factors to consider when taking a risk? Caroline.
Of course, Lucy. I think what's really interesting to hear Alastair reflecting on that point about taking the time to consider the risk, as you say, Lucy. And I think that it's such an important point. It seems to me that from a charitable perspective, and obviously particularly a cultural charitable perspective, our boards are being asked increasingly to take on a range of tasks. And as you say, Alastair, they've got limited time and capacity, and they have limited amounts of space to make those kinds of reflections in. So for me, I think what we've really learned in that process, which I described, where we helped probably 100 cultural organisations now in the last year to define priority audiences that they're super serving, they're making medium-term committed change with and for, thinking about their purpose. And for us, the purpose is defined as the work, the audiences, and the change that's being brought about, and the theory of change, the how they do that. And having that captured somewhere so that trustees can really quickly refresh themselves. I certainly, for my role at National Centre for Writing, have taken as a sample in our resources section on our website, taken the top sheet and created that little resource for myself, because I know that between meetings, a lot of that information gets away from me and I have to refresh myself. And for me, that's how I feel I can play a useful member as a board member. I can do more than just clap from the sidelines. I can really take on that space of interrogating and saying, how do we do more? How do we do better? So for me, it's about the staff and the board having that same clarity and focus on what you're trying to do for whom. Then you can start to have that conversation that Alastair's quite rightly talking about, engaging openly and early. Absolutely.
Thank you, Caroline. Yeah, absolutely. Clarity of purpose and focus in order to make sure that you're all starting from the same point when considering risk taking. Alastair, did you have anything to add to that?
I was going to build. I think in terms of the issues you consider, the factors you consider on considering risk, they're inherently, I was trying to think whether they're any different. I think they're inherently the factors you think about when you're saying, do you want to do something? What's the impact on artistic impact? What's the impact on your audiences, your people, your communities? What's the impact on sustainability, on diversity, of economic resilience? Right? So I think it's about how do you have a holistic conversation about impact and risk of the things which you're seeking to do. I think the one add is also just how do you engage with people and take people sometimes through a journey, especially if the answer is going to be, and you know what, we're going to take on this risk, or you know what, this thing which you care passionately about, right? And you care about the organization too, and the audiences and everything, we're actually not going to do. Right? I think the way you take people along that journey, so that even if people don't necessarily agree, they feel good about the process. Right? I think that type of engagement is an important thing as well.
Yes.
If I may, Lucy, that just chimes so closely with me, Alastair. And we've worked with a number of cultural organisations who lost their MPO funding. And that process where sitting everybody down and agreeing together what the priorities were, what the purpose was, really meant that it wasn't the chief executive, the artistic and the executive directors who are having to say, we're not doing these things anymore. It's really enabled them to say, right, we've come together and we've made these choices and we can stand behind them as a team. So yeah, that resonates so well for me. Thank you. Sorry, Lucy, I jumped in.
No, not at all. No, I was going to say the same thing, the kind of value of ensuring that everyone feels heard, that has their perspective, and also then can stand behind the direction and the process that you're engaging in, and feels clear about that. So so that you can go into it wholeheartedly. Thank you both. That's really fantastic. And then I've just got one final question, if I may, which is, when it comes to risk taking within the cultural sector, what would you like to see more of the cultural sector doing?
Lucy, if I may, I think the thing that I'm really conscious of is, first of all, having more time and space, and to have the kind of processes that Alastair so eloquently described. I don't know if it's just the very good hospitality of our friends in Ireland that I've been spending time with recently, but I certainly have been noticed the contrast when I've spent time in Dublin, in terms of in what an easier, better space the colleagues there are in, and that they seem to be in a more thoughtful place and time, as a result of the economic pressures being slightly easier there. And I really contrast that with the experience of many, many of our colleagues here, who I think for whom it's very hard to raise their heads right now and to take the time and space to do what Alastair advises, but it actually makes it all the more urgent that they do. So I guess second only to that is the fact that I don't really think the sector's making proper use of social impact investment at the present time. And Lucy, it's an area that I know that you advise on, and I would just love to see some of the brilliant creativity of the cultural organisations we work with being directed into commercial avenues that serve them and enable them to further the work that they want to do, and to feel that they can have an entrepreneurial approach to this, We all know that many successful entrepreneurs will have had failed businesses before they finally really build that success. And there's no reason why cultural organizations shouldn't be able to lean into that same thinking and approach. So for me, those are the two factors: the ability to have time and space to raise one's head, and then secondly, thinking about taking advantage of the resources that are available. I'm sure Alastair's got things to add.
Please go for it, Alastair.
I'll firstly say, I mean, as I've been talking to an increasing number of organizations in the arts, and there's some outstanding examples there of people thinking in an incredibly purposeful way about risk. I think one example of two theatres who got together and carried out a mutual review of each other's risks. A museum which has identified fascinating opportunities to leverage its resources and expertise, both to further its mission and to create potential long-term revenue streams. And activity I've had about around organizations across my old area of classical music, and how do you look at changing diversity of performers and audiences, which is going to be an activity that has to be across multiple decades and has to involve multiple organizations. So I think there are outstanding activities going on, which there's the opportunity of organizations such as Achates to allow people to come together and share some of that experience. I also think there's some practical actions many organizations can take, and of course may already have taken, just to make sure that you've taken the time to learn the lessons from the pandemic. What went well, where are the capabilities you might want to enhance for other occasions or use again. Take a fresh look at risks you face in different horizons, new and emerging risks, and take an opportunity to sit back and look at your approach to risk, look at your risk model, and say, are there ways that we can make it even more effective and impactful in terms of our organization's success and sustainability?
Thank you so much. Thank you. And yes, I mean, I suppose I would just add around that social investment side of things, where, the cultural sector has traditionally been such a kind of grant-giving, grant-receiving mindset, I suppose, and really how to think about the opportunities and what we have as having a potential for return on that investment, and actually the commercial potential of so much of what the sector is doing, but not always thinking about it in that way. So shifting that mindset, and that's certainly something, as Caroline said, that we kind of are really delighted to work with companies on to encourage exploring that avenue more. So thank you both so much for that time. So I suppose just to kind of what I've certainly learned from this and taking from it is about finding the time as an organization and really prioritizing that approach to how risk is adopted within the organization, ensuring that there is a culture of risk that exists across the entire team at both board level, trustee levels, team level, key stakeholder level, ensuring that there is that wholehearted, as you said, Alastair, kind of approach to risk, and that there is a clear process for how risk is engaged with, in terms of the priorities that might exist of risk taking, and also then the different kind of avenues that might be available to organizations in taking risk. So thank you both so much for that. That was really, really inspiring, and I hope it's been interesting to everyone who will be watching too. And so just to wrap up and share a little bit about Achates, unless either of you have anything final to add. We will always like to talk with people about how we might be able to help. We offer strategy support from business planning to feasibility studies, recruitment support from development positions to CEO and trustee roles, and organizational change, helping you both transform your boards and teams through new hires and development and support of pre-existing teams. So thank you. The next Achates Inspires will be in June online, so please keep an eye out for more details, and we really appreciate you taking the time to join us today.